Yeah. What's his job? That's like.
I was just gonna say prison.
Prison is sweet. I guess that way. If it's prison, then I got that.
Oh boy.
What'd you get?
We're getting like a little marker animation with us today, like on everything that's exciting. How about that? It's a little funky. So Pollitt is the first. Pollitt writes the first one. So Pollitt's the one that's going what's wrong with gay marriage. Charles Colson's second one, gay marriage, societal suicide. I'm not worried about getting into personal beliefs as to this is why I agree with Pollitt or disagree, or agree with Colson, disagree. Looking at it like objectively from that argument standpoint, what are things about, and I think Heath, you were going, I don't get the evidence that he's using, that Colson was mentioning, that it doesn't really correlate. Personally, I think both arguments are pretty flawed. So
agree,
not
yeah.
worrying about what their viewpoint is, but the way that they structure it, I think there's definitely criticisms that could be had for both. So what are things that you notice about the way that they are structured? And it doesn't mean that you're being critical of it, but things that you take note of that could have been effective in some ways. We went through some logical fallacies, the last few days. What are some fallacies that you were noticing? Well, any surprises with the types of evidence that were thrown out? Kind of start with that thing, just reactions, and then we can bounce back and forth between the two articles. It's not that we have to start with one and then take a look at the other.
I think the first one saved is by far strongest argument for the last paragraph.
The separation of church and state,
Yeah,
kind
I
of.
felt like that was the
Okay.
by far the strongest argument.
So for her, and we'll read some other stuff by Kathy Pollitt throughout the course of the year. She still writes now for publication of The Nation. Tends to be a little bit more liberal viewpoint on some issues. She also, from a writing standpoint, she would kind of fall as a satirist. So she'll kind of go with some sarcastic comments, elements of humor, irony, things like that with it.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Colson, not quite so much, obviously, but yeah, an element of humor tends to be something that comes into her writing quite a bit. So it can be a little bit of an icebreaker, like, oh, she sounds funny, I like her. Where Colson is very cut and dry, and might not necessarily have that same thing with it. So we're dealing with separation of church and state when it comes to marriage. She looks at marriage as basically belonging to what? It's part of the state. So for her, marriage is all about state. Doesn't matter where you get married, it has to be sanctioned by the government, which is true. You have to get a marriage license. You go to the county courthouse, county courthouse, you take care of that stuff. I had to get a blood test before I get married. They didn't care where I got married. Just make sure you have this piece of paper. Okay. For Colson, how's he looking at marriage? As to what entity is kind of responsible or, kind of like owns it in a way. He's certainly kind of going more with the kind of church angle for it. So it's not something about, the state owned, but this would be a church, I don't want to put event, but church sanctioned, I guess would be maybe a better way of putting it. Who's he writing for? Take note of the publication that this gets published in 2004. Pollitt's writing in 03, he's writing in 04.
Oh yeah, I did.
His publication is, which you just already said.
Christianity Today.
Yeah, he's writing for Christianity Today. So,
about like the.
They go in multiple runs. Christianity Tomorrow is currently looking for new writers, so if you want to start, sending resumes out and all that kind of stuff, you can.
You get a job even though you were
Christianity,
That sounds like the day after I turned 40.
Oh wow. Do you still work at Christian?
I don't know necessarily reactions that people were having, as you're reading Colson's article. But his readership, the folks who would be reading it in real time, most are probably going to be in agreement with him because of the values, the perspective is going to be very similar. So Colson is certainly going with a very religious based, conservative point of view. Not that this necessarily would also kind of add into it, but when was he born? 1931, so when this is getting published in 2004, he would be 72, 73 years old. So certainly this would kind of be an old school, you would think kind of viewpoint with things. What has he done for many years so far that he mentions in the article? And not just minister, but also prison ministry. So he has like these personal experiences, with felons in jail, and now he's making arguments that's going to kind of tie it back to same-sex marriage and whatnot. So certainly this is going to play a big part in his viewpoint of things. Pollitt's background, Pollitt's experience. How does she feel about marriage? I'm not really in favor of it, one way or the other.
Yeah, she doesn't practice it personally.
And I'm more for monogamous free love, and then she puts in a little equipment on it. That's really, done much for me. But she's not one who really is, for marriage in the first place. So when it comes to her and her viewpoint of marriage, whether it is heterosexual, whether it is homosexual, she really doesn't care, because she really doesn't care about marriage. So the values that are in conflict here, it's not an argument that's going to mesh very well, and not that they're writing necessarily against one another, but it's not an argument that if the two of them were going to debate it, we would be in totally two different stratospheres, as to the makeup of it. What's the reason that Pollitt would say that people should get married? Basically, you get married so long as you love one another. His idea of marriage, the purpose really for Colson, if you're going to get married, is because you will have children. So the whole procreation argument, again, this doesn't match up. You have two totally different values going at one another. One's about love, one's about having kids. And I know we're looking at this from an argument standpoint, but I mentioned to you when we started talking about the diddles and soapstone and all that kind of stuff, I said the one device that folks kind of struggle with the most maybe early on would be syntax. And as you read more, you start to see the impact that syntax can have. Syntactically, what is something that Colson does in his writing? And he does it like right off the bat, and he's consistent. He does, what does that do to it?
He doesn't.
Okay, it's not real marriage. It's that, you can think you're married, but you're not underlying marriage, which is a great example of how syntax can work and the impact that it can be. By him writing this, you can tell then that he's not going to look at same-sex marriage as being obviously the same as quote-unquote traditional marriage. And the main thing it comes down to is marriage for him has to be between a man and a woman, because that's the only way that you can naturally end up having kids. If you can't have children, then it's not going to be marriage. We can't give it that name. And then you start to kind of add the religious viewpoint that go along with it. What do you think about the evidence, the reasoning that he starts to give? Because some of you are getting tired up before we even pass the quiz out. This evidence doesn't make any sense. Why not?
I mean, I think that because he has a unique perspective, whenever it comes to marriage, having worked in the prison ministry.
Yeah, like that certainly gives him, in his mind, then, why does his work within the prison ministry matter with his argument of marriage?
Because it's a ministry.
It was so we get the religious background, like that would be going with it. And in his mind, you said for Pollitt, the end of her argument you thought was the strongest. Let's take a look at Colson's last paragraph, which I think is on page 568. And certainly this ties into his experience within the prison system. Marriage is not a private institution designed solely for the individual gratification of its participants. If we fail to enact a federal marriage amendment not allowing same-sex marriage, we can expect not just more family breakdown, but also more criminals behind bars and more chaos in our streets.
I felt like his statistics were kind of weak too. Like he was like 60% of rapists and 72% of adolescent murderers never knew or lived with their fathers. And like he's trying to connect that to gay marriages, but like those aren't. It's not the same thing.
But he's convinced it is. So let's do this first before, and I would agree with you. The link is very tenuous, all right, in mine. But why does it make sense to him? At least want to understand his perspective with this. I mean, he's going. If you allow same-sex marriage, we're going to. There is an R. It just didn't show up the full way. I can at least spell that word. And his prison ministry experience that Josh was talking about leads into this. That you're going to have more crime. What's the correlation that he has? Like this would be me in his essay going, you got to explain it a little bit more, add some more words so we get beyond like 950.
Well, to him and people like him, same-sex marriage is a crime.
And yeah, I mean you could look at it as sinful, you know, if you're coming from a conservative religious space. But I think he's going beyond that too, because he wants to, because his audience is for, I don't want to say for the most part going to be in agreement with him, but his audience for the most part will at least understand that. But if you're trying to put people over the top, and again, remember, this is before Supreme Court has gone, no, you do have right to marriage. So this was, you know, the big hot topic at the time. How's he trying to like get the people to kind of come back to his side?
Oh wait, come back to his side? I mean, I was gonna say that I think that he's making the argument because he talks about like family breakdown, and he's
Right.
saying that if there is same-sex marriage, then there either won't be a father or won't be a mother in the home.
You're missing a parent in his mind. If there's an audience, you know, that reading that's really going to get upset with Colson is going to probably be a single parent family child, you know, where the idea is you need a mother and he really focuses on father for this one, you need two parents, a male and a female, in order to grow up to be a good person. So not only could it be sinful in the sense of his perspective of same-sex marriage, but it's also going to be sinful in what that child will be committing down the road if he or she does not have both parents. So the argument now becomes, all right, well, is it better to be a single parent from a failed heterosexual marriage, or is the child better off having two parents? Who cares what the gender is, but at least there's two parents, you know, as opposed to one. But for him, you need to have the male, you need to have the female. Based on his experience now that he starts to bring in from the prison ministry, he goes, most of the people that he works with did not have a father. So if they have two mothers, it's going to be just like not having a father, and they will become criminals and rapists. And on top of that, criminals and rapists are two different things. They'll become murderers, rapists, whatever, ultimately kind of end up being the criminal. So his viewpoint is the father's absent, that's going to be a problem no matter what. You could have 8 mothers, but if the father is not there, you got a better chance, 90% chance of going to prison, as opposed to 10%, you know, within inner city neighborhoods if you come from a solid home in his mind. If you're a reader coming from a single family background, you're going to go, wait a minute, you're saying that my mother or my father is not going to be able to raise me, at which point your credibility, your view of his credibility has probably gone down. But he sees same-sex marriage as you're looking at ultimately, it's the loss of a parent. What would be a common rebuttal to that? Go, no, this is why you're wrong.
saying that it's like the permits go up for like not having a father, like it doesn't really having only one parent doesn't equate to having two parents of the same gender. It's not the same thing there. You still have the two parents who are so being raised.
So you could make the argument that, you know, say you have a child in foster care, you know, because of family issues, breakdown, whatever the case may be. Are we not going to send that child to a same-sex couple because, you know, we need to have two heterosexual parents, we can't have two homosexual parents, they're more likely to become crime. Aren't they better off going, you know, at least to a couple who would want them, who is going to raise them and whatnot? You can also argue from a logical fallacy standpoint that we're taking a look at. Hasty generalization, small sample size. He's who are the people that he's working with? People who are in prison. So what is he doing? He's looking for some kind of reason that would lead them to prison. Is his test group kids who come from single parent homes? Like, is he taking a random collection of people from single parent homes and trying to see how they turn out? Or is he taking people who are criminals and he's looking for a common trait among them? He's looking for a common trait among his population who is already in prison. It's not that I've worked with single parent children from all over, you know, the country or demographics, and I found that, you know, these are the ones. But the single parent kids who end up in jail are pretty likely to end up in jail. That's true. That's like 100%. If you're in jail, there's a chance you might be in jail at some point, you know, during your existence. Now he does try to extrapolate this, and I would say that's where Norway comes in. What's his whole point with Norway?
That one annoyed me too, because he was saying that like the rates of like unlock birth shot up once they legalized same-sex marriage, but I don't get the correlation between letting people who, like, after they get married can't have children together means that there's going to be more births out of marriage. Like, where is the connection?
And and when I say there is a connection, I understand what he means. The problem is, again, you're not getting that full explanation of it. Because what he's concerned about isn't really just same-sex marriage, even though that's like his title. You know?
It's out of wedlock.
Well, he's worried about any kind of marriage. And certainly, I think this is where a conservative 73-year-old viewpoint is going to be different from a 16-year-old viewpoint, or even a 7-year-old viewpoint. Sadie, the second grader, she's always worried about her Uncle Travis. Uncle Travis is on her mother's side. It's not my fault. Uncle Travis is, how old is Uncle Travis? 36. Uncle Travis is not married. Sadie is worried, when will Uncle Travis get married? And we go, who knows? It's probably not likely, would be my guess. We'll see. We won't get Mrs. Kane off topic. Just Uncle Travis. You could get like a full doctorate out of it.
Maybe I'll do that.
You could.
Wow.
So literally, Sadie did ask, like, I think it was either last week or this week, when will Uncle Travis get married? Like, we don't know. Well, her quote, he lives with his girlfriend, so at least that's something. You know, maybe something, you know. Now, to a 73-year-old from him, he would be upset with cohabitation, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, because what are you not doing? You're not going through the proper channels. You know, first you get married, then you live together, then you have kids. The problem with Norway and the out-of-wedlock birth rate is, and again, out-of-wedlock meaning you have kids when you're not married. His argument, and Zach, I think a lot of readers would be going along with you. Where are you going with this? Norway 93 allows, in highlighter, Norway in 93 allows same-sex marriage. Then out-of-wedlock birth rates skyrocket. His argument would be when they allowed that, quotation marks, as Medina, mentioned, when they allowed marriage to occur, heterosexual couples would then be like, well, wait a minute. If you can have same-sex marriage, which is marriage, why can't we have marriage where we live together, could have kids, but we're not going through the legal and religious process of actually getting married? So his argument would be the same-sex marriage in 93 desanctified it. It wasn't as important to people as it was before, as it should have been. And so you have couples going, we don't really need to get married. We can, now have kids, live together, all that kind of stuff. Is there a correlation between the two? I personally don't think so. I think he's trying to grasp some stuff and put it together. And I think, for our argumentation crew, I think this would be a great example of Texas sharpshooter.
I was
where
just going to say,
you are, don't you wish you had said it?
Yeah.
Where you're convinced this is the end result. Now I have to find stuff that proves that I'm right. Which honestly is how we tend to do our arguments. This is what I believe, now I must prove it. As opposed to going through, let's find data, let's find evidence, now let me lead to an argument. No, we can't be that objective. We have to be subjective when we do stuff. But from the stuff that we were talking about in class, I think that would be a good example of false cause. By enacting same-sex marriage, now you have more babies being born that don't have true mothers and fathers because they're not married. But yeah, I'd say you got some types of sharpshooter stuff kind of going on. What's Pollitt's problems? So far as argument. Like, where do you think she could lose the reader a little bit, or her argument doesn't simply hold up as much?
I've never heard the argument that marriage is the way women domesticate men.
Yeah.
But maybe that was more a thing at the time.
Well, you're making me feel 2003, back in the time. You were at least alive in 2003.
Yep.
Little
I was
1-year-old.
walking and talking.
There you go. See, so back in the time. I think as you get older, like more into the 25 to 35 range, is where that idea would come around. I don't think that's a common belief really necessarily, but the whole idea that marriage is a way to get men to quote unquote settle down would kind of be like that whole argument with the domestication of them, and then we can start doing dishes, changing laundry, maybe do a diaper every now and then. Besides our hanging up pictures forbidden and trying to make improvements to our home that you then hire a contractor to fix. Not my case, though. So in some ways, for the time, to kind of steal that phrase, this is a real hot button issue that you had churches dividing at this point as to, do you allow same-sex clergy? Are you going to allow same-sex marriages to take place? The Episcopalian Church was like fractured, especially in Pittsburgh when this was going on. And I think when you do take a look at Pollitt, in some ways there might be a little too much of an element of humor to it, that it seems like you're downplaying it. For me, when she kind of goes, who really wants to get married anyway?
Yeah, when she it goes on a tangent, not even that she personally doesn't like marriage, but just talks about overall why she doesn't like marriage and why she thinks it's bad. I feel like it doesn't really help anyone, because she's just kind of going on a tangent about why she doesn't like marriage. I don't feel like that.
It doesn't.
It doesn't contribute to. So let's have it doesn't contribute to her argument.
I'm not a fan of Colson's reasoning, okay? Like the facts, the evidence that he's using. But his argument is focused. You know where he stands, okay? So if you're looking at this from a TWA standpoint, hey, Chuck, good focused argument. So there's some fallacies that we have to take a look at within the evidence, but I know exactly where he stands, and he is consistent with it top to bottom. Pollitt kind of comes across as a little bit of a qualification. And I mentioned to you the main way you can mess up a qualification is not by picking a side. She picks a side. Like, we know what it is, but her tangent, she kind of goes off and that, all right, what are we talking about? Are we looking at like the domesticating men? Are we taking a look at why marriages in the 14th century between the queen or the princess of Denmark and the prince of, France wasn't a good idea since it was by proxy? There's not that consistency to it where all the pieces are kind of lining together. It's almost as if each paragraph would turn into like its own kind of essay. I think of the two, the Pollitt one might be the one that we could be more in line to write about, not because of topic, but because we have so many ideas going on in our head, but we can't always keep it focused. And so that's what you want to kind of steer clear of when you're putting an argument together, consistency throughout the whole entire thing. So the lesson learned, another one did a great job.
What's Episcopalian?
What,
The Episcopalian.
it's a Protestant denomination.
Okay.
So Episcopalians would fall under with, Lutherans, Methodists.